For this morning's talk, I was going to mention about the use of insight to be able to practice in meditation and become very deep. And much of this insight is going to be about how to meditate. It also will involve just what insight truly is and how we know that it's insight. You may have been to see many teachers of meditation, many Dhamma teachers, and have experienced that many teachers are respected, but sometimes they teach totally different things. So how do you know which teacher is correct? And this is where you find that insight is very difficult to define. You may sort of say that, oh, the basic insight of Buddhism is anicca, dukkha, anatta. What do those things actually mean? Even something as common as anicca, there's still much about anicca which people just don't see, don't understand. We always, sometimes, not always, but sometimes we're told that anicca means rise and fall. It does not mean that. It's much deeper than that. If ever you read the Satipatthana Sutta, there you see, I'm sure you've heard this many times, but there you see in that teaching that many times people have called it just to see that these sankharas come and go, rise and fall. But then when you look at those teachings yourself, you find something more. You actually find it does not mean things coming and going, rising and fall. If you look in the Satipatthana Samyutta, there it describes what this really means. It means not just seeing things come and go, but why they come and why they go, the causes and conditions which create things coming and going. And that opens up a far deeper understanding of just this Dhamma. For example, just the first of the Satipatthanas, your body, you say you find out, discover, contemplate, investigate why it comes and why it goes, the causes for this body being maintained and staying. And you see some wonderful things there, but it's not just, what people usually say is food, but more than that, there's things like your will, the will to live. And even the Buddha mentioned that that is one of the important causes for the maintenance of this body. And you may have seen that many times. Having been a monk and being on people's deathbeds, actually not on their deathbeds, but next to them, many times, it's fascinating to see that sometimes people who are dying continue to survive, continue to live, because there's some reason why they don't want to die yet. They're not overcoming death. They can postpone it for a while. One of those common things when somebody is getting very sick and about to die, which keeps them going, they want some son, some daughter, or somebody who's very close to them to visit them. And I've seen this so many times in the hospital. They can die any day now, but they keep on surviving until somebody they really miss comes to visit them. And once they come to visit them, then a few hours afterwards, they pass away. Or one of the other things why people, for example, why they have still got that will to live, they can't let that one go, and they keep on suffering in the old body, but they don't die yet. I don't know how many times that you have seen this, But when a person gets very, very sick, they're in the hospital and they're not dying yet, they should die any time. And the whole family says, well, we've been sitting with our loved one for about 3 or 4 hours. Let's go and have some lunch. And then we go back. And as soon as the family walk out the room, that's when the person starts their dying process. In other words, as I've often said, that dying is a very personal, private matter. And it is actually best for many people done alone. You do it, your way without the family around you, creating an extra layer of emotional turbulence for you. But anyway, when you start looking at the causes of life or a body and how it continues, there you can actually see just so much that even the experience of just what they say contact, sensory experience, that also keeps the body going. If a person is, say, in a coma in hospital, and that could be one of your relations, loved ones, and you talk to them, they don't respond. You touch them, and there's no response also. So what do? The Buddha said that when you have the physical contact, that is one of the, or even sounds, that is one of the causes for maintaining the body. So it's sometimes helpful. It might be an old mother or grandmother, you think she can't hear you, talk to her, hold her hand, stroke her hair. You may think that she doesn't experience anything, but in many cases, people do. They can experience things, even though sometimes they say they're in a coma or they're just dying. And sometimes that stimulation can be just what keeps that body going. And one of the stories which I say to enforce this was of this lady, a Singaporean woman, who was in a coma. And I can say this because it's obvious that she came out of that coma later on. But she was in the bed, and every day was costing the family a lot of money just to keep the life support system on. And as she was day after day, eventually the doctor called the whole family in, family conference. Look, she's not going to make it. She's going to die. Can I have your permission to turn the life support systems off? Because it was a Singaporean family, Chinese, they all said, well, that's the responsibility of the eldest son. And the eldest son said, that's unfair. I need you to help me make the decision. Imagine that was one of the biggest decisions in your life, and to do it alone. They said, that's tradition. Oldest son, you choose. And so, of course, this was a matter of life and death, literally. So he thought and he thought and he thought. And then eventually he said, give her one more day. Now, on the other side of that conversation, the woman herself, she had come out of her coma, but she could not speak. She could not move. She couldn't do anything. And she said she heard everything about that conversation. And imagine that was you in the bed and you're realizing you're coming out of the coma and other people are discussing whether you should be killed or carry on. It was very traumatic for her. And all she could do, she couldn't even move any part of her body, was to wish, son, I'm still here. Please don't kill me yet. And when she heard her son say, give her one more day, thank you, son. That's what she thought, but she couldn't express that to her children yet. within the 24 hours after that discussion, she managed to move, I think, some toes or something. Some part of the body she could control. And that proved to the doctors that there was something still going on in there. And that was the beginning of a long road to recovery. And she did make a full recovery. Because I remember inviting her to some of our conferences. Did you remember seeing her, Victor? The lady who was in a coma, who listened to the doctor advise, there's nothing left in there, please turn the machine off. But she came totally back along the road to recovery, but she learned how to speak and walk again. As a fascinating discussion. So anyhow, you can see that if you really want your loved one to come back, to carry on living, it's good to be able to stimulate her senses, talk to her, stroke her, tell her what's going on in life. Because that stimulation, the sorts of things which you know she was interested in. I have read articles of people with dementia, and anybody who has dementia, that sometimes to get them recognizing life again, you start talking to them about things they were always interested in. You don't go saying, how are you? Just talk about the family. Or what I found, many elderly people, especially, I don't know why, elderly women, if they're in almost like a coma or dementia, talk about money things. They kind of wake up. It's weird. But there was this old Thai lady who supported our monastery in Bodhinyana for such a long time. Eventually, she got dementia, but she did make an offering, a big offering of 50,000 Aussie dollars to build a stupa in Bodhinyana Monastery. We talked about it, discussed it. Do we really want one? In the end, the whole Sangha decided that we like to keep Bodhinyana Monastery as a peaceful, quiet place. Too many visitors and tourists would disturb the peace. So we decided unanimously we didn't want to build a stupa. But now she has donated that money, $50,000. We cannot use it for anything else. According to our Vinaya rules, if that's what we received it for, that's how we should use it. So I went to see her in Thailand to ask, what do you want us to do with that 50,000? It's a lot of money. We're not going to build a stupa. I had permission from our committee to actually arrange for that to be totally reimbursed to her account. That's what we have to do as Buddhist monks. But then when I made an appointment, she said she probably won't even remember anything. But then when I mentioned it, she said, oh yes, I remember that $50,000. And that's not uncommon. It's also anything else which has an emotional value for people. That's why music can often stimulate people with dementia, if it's a music they like, stimulate people to start recalling things, to remembering things. And that's also why if somebody is dying, if you want them to survive, then if they can't even speak to you, get some beautiful music. I don't mean those death chants, which sometimes I have going all the time. Imagine that was you in the bed, you didn't know what was wrong with you, and people started chanting these death chants. You think, is there something you haven't told me, children? Or one of the other things which I was taught as a young monk, if anybody is sick in hospital or at home, and if you are asked to visit them, please visit them alone. Don't go as a group of 4 monks. because in Thailand, 4 monks is a symbol for death. You know, the Chinese word for 4, see? And that will really scare them. But I do remember. So I usually go just either alone with another monk or something. I remember this one lady, I think she was our secretary of our Buddhist society, and she had that women's operation hysterectomy. Now, I don't know too much about medicine, but apparently the incision, which was only just made and just stitched up, was like a vertical incision on her chest. So when I went in, the first thing she said to me, Ajahn Brahm, please, no jokes. It will really hurt. And my response was, if you didn't want to hear a joke, you should not have invited me. Poor lady. But anyhow, just that engagement with somebody, even visiting them in hospital, that engagement gave them a boost of life energy, which is one of the reasons why you do that. Sometimes, if that is one of the causes for maintaining a person's life, make that sort of pleasant emotions or pleasant feelings, of course, that will help sustain a person's life. So little insights like that, you can turn from suttas into your practice, and you can really assist people. And a lot of times, if a person is still young, they've still got lots of life in front of them, but they got very, very sick for one reason or another, that's an important thing to be able to do, to give them a boost of energy, so they may be able to come back again, out from a coma, out from, let's say, dementia or something, and start living again. So when we understand what the Buddha meant, you get real insights into the causes which keep life going and the causes which sort of maintain good life, then you can understand that story I told already about Ted. I think, did I tell that here, or was that at one of the earlier talks in the BGF? It was here. Okay. I'll just say it very briefly so you know what I'm talking about. Ted, who was in the hospice, he had lung cancer and he had about 4 or 5 days to live. And the first night in the hospice, the nurse said, "What do you want for dinner, Ted?" And that was the case. He said, "Can't have anything oily, I've got high cholesterol. Can't have anything salty, hardened arteries. Can't have anything sugary, I've got diabetes problems." And he went on a whole list of things which he was not allowed to eat. And then the nurse said, "What are you talking about, Ted? You're not going to die of a heart attack or a stroke. The cholesterol's not going to kill you, nor is the hardened arteries, nor is the sugar. What's going to kill you is the cancer in about 4 or 5 days. You can eat whatever you want." And so imagine that was you. Imagine that was, you'd had no worries about if this is healthy or it's not healthy, because you're going to die anyway. So you eat all the food you really love, sugary, oily, salty. That's what he did. And the unexpected consequence of that, this is true story, the unexpected consequence, he went into remission. He walked out of that hospice, which you're not supposed to do, and had another 6 months of life. That's how the remission was. The joy, the engagement in life was what made him stay in life for another few months. I love stories like that, because when we say anicca, it's not just knowing, yes, we will all die. Not at the same time, please. I mention this every rains retreat over in Perth. I mention this. I get all of the close disciples, all the people at the entry to the rains retreat ceremony. And I tell them, during our rains retreat, the monks like a bit of peace and quiet. We want to meditate a lot, to study if we need to study. So please, if you really are a devoted disciple of Bodhinyana Monastery in Perth, please do not die during the rains retreat. Don't be selfish and think of yourselves and die when you want to. I think that's quite selfish, isn't it? Put your death off until after the rains retreat. And then after the rains retreat, you can die whenever you want. Actually, it works. The number of people who die during the rains retreat is always less than on average. At least last year, it seems to be that way. And I don't think I'm wrong. It's almost as if you give a suggestion, you can. So put off your death, delay it. Because I've seen that too many times as well in those stories of when a person is very sick, they're dying, but they don't die. They keep on hanging on. The doctor said they could be any day now, and the weeks have gone past. And that was the old story, that the person continues living because they do not want to cause so much grief to the people they care about. And so if that ever happens, you see someone and they're not dying, just please give them permission to die. If you're your closest loved one. I've seen that too many times. The usual case was Jenny and Steve. Jenny nursed, Steve had terrible cancer. They're both young. And Steve was dying of cancer. He was supposed to have died days ago, but he was still hanging on. And the reason was, the last thing he ever wanted to do is cause such grief and sadness to the woman, his wife, he loved so much. So I told when I visited Jenny, have you given your husband permission to die yet? She never answered me. She just jumped on the bed, hugged her husband very gently because he was so weak. I said, I love you. I give you permission to die. Not like that. It's much more tender. And of course, they cried in each other's arms. And that afternoon, that evening, he died. It's easy to understand the psychology of that. The worst thing he could possibly do, he was thinking, is cause so much grief to Jenny, his wife. So he decided to keep pushing and pushing, holding on for her. But also, another aspect of that, there was one of the monks who was with Ajahn, with me actually, because he was a monk with us in Thailand. And he was from Tennessee, and he spoke with this wonderful Southern American accent. Hi, y'all. Don't think I can do it. Anyway, but also he was a very smart person. He was a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford. He was a champion wrestler and also a very, very brilliant scholar. But when he was in Thailand, he developed 2 strains of typhoid concurrently. It was a very rare case, but the doctors, when they examined him, he has typhoid, but 2 strains. And that really, really made him so sick that it was just good luck that a doctor came to visit Wat Bananajat, took one look at him and said, get him to Bangkok immediately. So we got him, we don't usually do this, first class carriage with a couple of monks to get him to Bangkok. And those of you who've, this was maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they, as soon as that's the quickest way to get anybody to Bangkok, the, what's it called, the airlines hadn't really opened up yet. And so the doctor had arranged an ambulance to be on the platform of the main station, Hualongpong station in the middle of Bangkok, which was a very difficult thing to do. And so this monk was taken from the train into the ambulance and rushed to the nearest hospital. And the doctor who met him at the station, I knew, and he told me that as soon as he took one look at this monk, he thought there was not enough time to get him to the hospital. He was literally that close to death. But he did get to the hospital. They kept him alive, but he never really got better. From being a champion wrestler, he became bedridden. And that's when they sent this monk over to UK, thinking that in that monastery there, he could get much better treatment. But whatever treatment they gave him, he did not get better at all. He was always in this attic of the Chithurst Monastery, an old country house. And I always, when I went to visit him, I said, this is usually where they put the people who are crazy, in the attics of country houses in England. If you ever read like Jane Eyre or something, that's where they put the crazy people, up in the attic. And he said, yeah, that's what it feels like. Because he could never even get outside the front door of his house, of his room. He could manage sometimes on a good day to get up, stagger to the door, and then stagger back again. He lost all his energy. Until what happened to him was that one day the head monk of that monastery went up to see him. He'd been in that room for a couple of years, never been able to get out because of his sickness. The head monk said, I've come up here on behalf of all of the other monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, all your friends and supporters. On behalf of all of them, I've come up here to give you permission to die. Don't try getting better. You're so sick, you've tried that, just let go and die. And of course, this very strong, in the old days, monk burst out crying. And then he started to get better. And he's still alive to this day. He lives in South Africa. And that was many years ago. You can understand the causes. Why? He was trying so hard to get better. It was making him sick. Literally. So if you've got an old mother or something who's getting sick, you can go to her bedside and say, Mum, it's okay, I'll give you permission to die. No, don't do that. She'd think you're up to some mischief. But you can see why it works. The causes, what makes somebody get very sick, the tension which he has there. One of those other causes which makes people sick. I like telling this story because there's some context here and connection between Bodhinyana Monastery. Our monastery, all the monks, obviously, that our local doctor is the one who lives, who practices in Serpentine. That's our nearest town, Serpentine. It's a very small town. There's only maybe about 4 or 5 shops. That's all. Country town in Western Australia. But the doctor there is a gentleman called Brian Walker. And the reason I mention him is because before he came to Serpentine in Western Australia, he used to work in Hong Kong. He was a GP there. And he had a patient there who was Indian by birth, but was working some business over in Hong Kong. And she was suffering from cancer, very bad cancer. And eventually, this woman, his patient, was, well, actually, she had many operations, but on the latest operation, the doctors in the hospital were trying their hardest to keep her alive, but she passed away. And then she came back again. And when she came out of the anesthetic, she was alive, surprised all the doctors. The first thing she said to her doctors was, "My cancer is cured." And they thought this was crazy speak because, the tumors were still there. But then she actually continued with that statement, "My cancer is cured." Because what she did, many of you may have read her book, I think it's called Dying to Live, or seen her on documentaries. It's a lady called Anita Moorjani. She said that once she died, she left her body, went to this wonderful light, went into that light. She was a Catholic. She called it union with God. I understand from what she said, this was like a first jhana experience. And inside that, total bliss, but also as she came out, the insight of what was causing her cancer. And what was causing her cancer, what she saw very clearly, she was trying so hard all her life to please others. She was a very successful person, had a good family, a good business, but nevertheless, that pressure of always having to meet other people's expectations and surpass those expectations was the stress which she saw so clearly was the cause of her cancer. So when she actually came back from that experience into her body, the first thing she said was, "My cancer is cured." She's never going to do that anymore. She saw the reason why there was a cancer. And of course, she made 100% full recovery, went on TV and all sorts of other stuff. But the weird part of it, that her doctor, Mr. Walker, Dr. Walker, decided to move to Australia and decided to be the doctor for myself and all the other monks in Bodhinyana Monastery. He's a Buddhist. He comes on our retreats because that experience with his patient, Anita Moorjani, changed his life, made him see medicine in a totally different way. The causes of staying alive, the causes for dying. This is where we understand the first Satipatthana in a way which maybe you haven't seen before. But not just that. When we see the causes behind things, the reasons behind things, that is amazing, just the insights which you have and how that can change your life. Like many of you, you ask me about relationships, and I don't know why you do that. I'm a monk. I've been a monk over 48 years now. The last relationship I had was in this, when was it, 1972 or something, I'm not sure. That's a long time ago. But you still ask me those questions, why? It's because you do have some answers. And you know, all of those wonderful little stories, those insights about relationships. This is part of learning to live a peaceful life. You won't all become nuns and monks. If you did, I'll be in great trouble. There'd be no one to make my lunch and my breakfast. But nevertheless, you do have relationships. How can you make the best out of them? One of the first things which I often say, and you've heard it before, but I love telling this story, and there's every now and again, there may be one or two people who haven't heard about the chicken and the duck. How many of you haven't heard the chicken and the duck story? Really, that many? I think you may have heard it, but maybe you're starting dementia. I don't know. But anyway, so there was this couple, and after lunch, they were having a walk in the park. And as they were walking in the park, they heard a sound, quack, 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 quack. I usually do a much better quack, quack, but I have got a little bit of I think they call it guitar in my throat. But anyway, quack, 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 quack. And straight away, the wife said, "Oh, can you hear that? That's a chicken." And husband said, "Pardon?" I said, "Chicken." He said, "Darling, that is not a chicken. That is a duck." He said, "No, no, 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 no. That's a chicken, I'm sure." And he went quack, quack again. "See, it's a chicken." He said, "It's not a chicken, it's a duck." But she said, "It is a chicken." He said, "No way, it's a duck." He said, "It's a chicken." And she started to get emotional, started to get teary. And he looked into her eyes. She was about to burst out crying. And he remembered why he married her. What's the most important part about a relationship? So he squeezed her hand gently and said, "Darling, I think you're right. There is a chicken." And it went quack, quack again. Yes, it's a chicken. And she said, "Thank you, darling." And that evening, he had a wonderful walk with his wife and a lovely dinner in the evening without any argument. That was a very smart husband. Because who cares whether it's a chicken or a duck? Is that really important? Or having a hot dinner, is that more important? So the reason we tell that story is so often in a relationship, we think that being right is the most important. And that's why we're willing to argue with people we care about. I'm right. But there's nothing wrong with being wrong. Because he realized the most important part of a relationship is the love, not being right. And secondly, how many times you think you're right? You're absolutely certain it's right. It's went quack, quack. It has to be a duck. And because I have mentioned that story many places over so many years, and so because we have something called Wikipedia, some of the students have actually done the research and they've found at least one chicken who goes quack, quack. That chicken was orphaned and was adopted by a family of ducks. And because that chicken grew up with ducks, it goes quack, quack. It could have been that chicken. So that's one of the reasons why being in harmony is more important than being right. And the second thing with even relationships, which is a powerful insight, because sometimes you get asked the question, especially being in a Mahayana Buddhist temple, the difference between Mahayana and Theravada, just generally, is that Theravada just think about themselves and their own enlightenment? Is Mahayana sacrificing themselves and just thinking of others? Which one is right? And of course, you know the answer, that both are wrong. And to illustrate that whenever, you haven't heard this before, you're actually paying attention. The explanation of that is something which I always do whenever I'm blessing a marriage. That's one of the things which monks do. So when I'm blessing marriages, there comes a time once the handcuffs are, the rings are exchanged. Well, I look at the new bride in the eyes, look at her. And at this time, she's always really gooey and soft. And I say, now you're a married woman. From this day on, you must not think of yourself. And she smiles sweetly, yes. And I look at the guy and say the same thing to him. From this day on, you must not think of yourself. He smiles and says, yes. Although, I've got to be honest, when I do this in Australia, especially for Australian husbands marrying something like Malaysian wives, the guy always pauses before he answers. But eventually he comes down, yes, I won't think of myself. Still looking at the guy. I say, and from this day on, you're a married man now. You must never think of her, your wife. Don't think of her. And then look at the wife. You don't need to be a mind reader to see what they're thinking. They're thinking, who invited this crazy monk? Looks at the wife and say, from this day on, you must not think of your husband. Don't think of him at all from this day on. And I always say this is a wonderful teaching technique. When people, they trust you, you've got a good reputation, but you say something which confuses them. It's not a joke, it's a very serious part of a relationship, the answer. And I say that once you're married, you must never think of yourself, nor must you think of your partner. You must only think of us. You're in it together. It's us. Any problem you have in your relationship, it's not his problem, it's not her problem, it's our problem. In Malaysia, how many different political parties are there? Is it that party's problem, the other party's problem? It's our problem. The whole of Malaysia. If you can try and understand that, you understand what relationships are about. If you understand that, you understand that sacrificing yourself to let other people become enlightened, or just worrying about your own enlightenment, both are wrong. It's about us. We all benefit when somebody becomes enlightened. It's not just for one person. Everybody prospers. So anyhow, without getting too more political, either religiously political or political, you can see that these are insights which actually work for people, make it a happier place to live in, more peace, more wisdom. And you can see that it does assist even when you are on a retreat. Even all the people in the room where you sleep at night. It's we sleep there, not just I sleep there. So it's like a little family in there. And if you don't care for one another, you find everybody suffers. So that's one of the reasons why, even though if you are coming to this place and you think of yourself as a hard-nosed Theravada in it for your own enlightenment and nobody else's, of course that never ever works. Because our compassion and kindness, if we help others, they help us. And also the kindness itself is such an important part of the meditation practice. For so many years, I saw some monks very close to would have amazing opportunities to go to caves and mountains, forest monasteries where there was hardly any duties at all. And I would stay behind at Wat Banana Chat doing their visas and other little jobs. And when they would come back once a year, they had to sign their visa papers. I was, we'd chat, we'd talk and ask, how was your meditation? You went to these great caves, mountains, nice and peaceful. And the weird part of that, I found that my meditation was deeper than theirs. And they had all these amazing opportunities, days, weeks, months alone in a cave, hardly any distractions at all. And that really shook me. How come that when I was spending so much time working for others, I still had plenty of time to meditate, but not as much as they had? How come my meditation was deeper? And you realize that whenever you do any service for others, it's an act of letting go, not thinking of yourself, but making sure all these other monks didn't have to do all this visa process. And I realized that if you think I'm going to become enlightened, it's all about you, that selfishness, the idea of a me, a self, stops the meditation progress. And very often people ask me, Ajahn Brahm, you give discourses about jhanas, you write about jhanas, you debate about jhanas, but Ajahn Brahm, do you achieve those jhanas? Do you do it? And for many years, I used what the monks know is the Pachittiya 8 rule. In the 8th Pachittiya, which we do keep our rules, was saying that a monk cannot tell even novices or lay people any details about their meditation experiences. You cannot tell anybody if you're a stream winner or once returner, non-returner, or arhat. You can't say to them that you can achieve this stage of enlightenment or that stage of enlightenment or this particular jhana or that jhana. And for many years, it's kind of frustrating, but you have to keep those rules. And so it was about, 10 or 15 years ago when I was in Sri Lanka, and it was just in a meeting of many, many monks, forest monks. And there they asked me, said, look, you can't use the excuse of the 8th Pachittiya, there's no lay people here. So Ajahn Brahm, you've written all these books about jhana. Can you attain those jhanas? They asked me that. And then I did notice they were recording it. So it was some layperson going to see it. So I found a wonderful answer which satisfied me and satisfied others as well. You know what the answer was? I said in public, Ajahn Brahm cannot enter jhana. How do you feel? Am I a fake? Am I a fraud? I think many of you know me But this is not a straight answer. I said, and I think I'm pretty sure that I escaped that rule. I said, Ajahn Brahm has to disappear first. And then the jhanas happen. And that's accurate. And that's also teaching how to meditate. These things are not self-attainments. It's not what you achieve. It's what happens when you disappear. So if ever you experience any of those wonderful states, it's like you have vanished. The Ajahn Brahm or the Datuk Victor We that you knew is gone. And then you have these wonderful experiences. Because with your sense of self, that's also where there'll always be some wanting, some attaching, which stops these beautiful stages of freedom. Years and years and years ago, I noticed as soon as I became a monk and went to Thailand, I let go of girlfriends. That's what you have to give up. But then you'd be so concerned about food. I was attaching to food. And then you went to the northeast of Thailand and the food over there was not worth attaching to. But then you had other things you started getting attached to, like a cup of coffee, or like maybe once a month we'd get a Time magazine. And I still remember just one day, we'd finished all our work and I had a chair, I had a Time magazine and a bottle of Pepsi Cola. And I sat in that chair and no one was going to disturb me for an hour. And I could read a Time magazine and drink a bottle of Pepsi. And I thought, life doesn't get better than this. So what am I saying? Because there's so many other things in this world, but I've forgotten about them. But even there, you were attached to a bottle of Pepsi and attached to a Time magazine, reading something in English. And that's where you realize that whenever you put down one thing, you tend to pick up something else. So you renounce many things as a monk, but you renounce one thing, and you picked up another thing. So there's no end to it, I thought. And then eventually you figured out that if you really want to let go of everything, you have to cut off the thing which is doing the picking up my hand. And I thought that was really smart. I've seen a nice insight which actually works. It was only metaphorical. I still got my two hands. But I thought that was such a smart teaching. And a few times I gave that simile in Dhamma talks. And then, of course, you started reading the Anguttara Nikaya and you saw the simile of the hand by the Buddha. The Buddha got there before me. But that was really a wonderful experience. If you think you invented a simile and you found out the Buddha did exactly the same years and years and years ago, it gives you kind of goosebumps. But nevertheless, it wasn't cutting off the hand. It was cutting off the thing which does the attaching and the owning, your sense of self. So you can enter a jhana, some of you, by a bit of luck. But if you really want to do it properly, cut off your sense of self. You don't attain those things. It's like when you vanish, when you're not there, when you don't want things, when you don't own things, when you don't interfere with things, then the doors are wide open. So these are insights, and they don't just come by thinking about things. the best insights come from your own practice and experience. You see things much deeper than you've ever seen before. And sometimes you challenge, what you read. I love doing that because one of the first books I actually read when I was still a lay Buddhist was the Satipatthana Sutta, an English translation done by two Sri Lankan monks. And in their introduction, they wrote that they had read that anyone who practices the Satipatthana as taught by the Buddha, even within 7 days, will either become a non-returner or fully enlightened. That's what the Buddha says. So they said, well, life is busy, but we can actually travel to Burma. We'll give it sort of 9 or 10 days. That's all we can afford. So we can become a non-returner or fully enlightened. Then we can go back to Sri Lanka and do other things. So off they went to Burma, sorry. Off they went to Burma. They joined a Vipassana retreat for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, that's more than the Buddha said, they weren't non-returners or enlightened. So they did it again, a second chance. And again, after 10 days, still not fully enlightened, nor non-returners. So they said, well, we practiced it didn't work, so let's actually translate it from the Pali into English. So that it did this translation. But when they actually, in the introduction, when they said where this translation came from, and how the Buddha said, if you do this practice, according to how the Buddha said, 7 days or 9 days, fully enlightened or a non-returner, why is it that people have done many of those Vipassana retreats? How many do you know went to those retreats and were fully enlightened or non-returners? When I saw that, I thought there must be something wrong here. The Buddha doesn't lie. The Buddha can't exaggerate. So there must be something they were doing or something they weren't doing, which the Buddha said you should do. And after being a monk for so many years, it's pretty obvious why people went on those retreats and they didn't get very much, certainly not stages of enlightenment. And that was where you understood from your own practice about what stillness in meditation does, and what mindfulness is. In each of the 4 satipatthanas, you have to develop strong mindfulness. The insight, what is strong mindfulness? I have mentioned it already. It is mindfulness which you can just look at something like a cup of water, and you can stay focused on it, not just for minutes, half an hour, with ease, no force. You can get tired. The mindfulness is stable, and you don't get bored. Wow. You see all these incredible reflections in this surface of this water. It's beautiful. I'm going to stop. I'm not making that up. I'm honest. When your mindfulness is still and you can see beauty in things, you can see things which you never expected to see. That mindfulness is really important. And it says to establish that mindfulness, even before you do any of the objects of the Satipatthana. And in order to establish that mindfulness, you have to have abandoned, those of you who know some Pali, loke abhijja domanasang. And when I first read the translations of those words, I couldn't understand the translations. It was usually having abandoned grief and covetousness for the world. Do you know what covetousness means? I was born in England. Well, I didn't really use that word. I don't know what it means. Covetousness, sort of, but not. It's not a word you use very regularly. In grief, you have grief for a loved one who's passed away, but grief for the world hasn't passed away yet. What does it really mean? And so because of that, I was again amazed when you started to look in the suttas. And when I started to learn Pali, I started to see those words used again and again and again and again. Loke abhijja was a synonym for kamachanda, the first hindrance. Not just used once or twice, about 30 or 40 times in the Anguttara Nikaya. Instead of the usual word for the first hindrance, they use loke abhijja. And then when I looked in the commentaries to the Satipatthana Sutta, they said it so clearly there that Vinaya loke abhijja domanasang refers to weakening the first hindrance and the second hindrance. Domanassa is used for a synonym for the second hindrance in two suttas. And when you can actually understand that's what they mean, and the commentary also said that in Pali, it's just an idiom there. Whenever you use the two words or the two of a group of words, like a whole group of words which occur together so many times, when you mention the first two, the other members of that group are also included. So even the commentaries, they said that that phrase, loke abhijja domanasang, refers to the five hindrances. And when you understood that, you saw that fact into the insight you had from your own practice. If you're going to do mindfulness training or mindfulness of the body or of experience, Vedana, we usually translate as feeling. I prefer the English word experience. And I do that not just because I'm trying to prove anything. I know my Pali. I know just the way the translation should be working. This is not just whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, what actually experience is, where it comes from, where it stops. And even citta, mind. How many of you know what mind is? People think they know, but you will never really understand the meaning of the word mind until you've experienced the jhana. I say that, hopefully you can ask some questions about it tonight. They won't be answered until tomorrow because we've got so many of yesterday's questions need to be answered tonight. But nevertheless, I would tear my hair out if I had any, and why people think they can do the citta vipassana when they haven't got an idea what the citta is. You need to experience when the mind is apart from all the other things. The Buddha's simile is like a goldsmith. When a goldsmith purifies that gold from all the other impurities, all the other elements, so there's just gold, only 100% gold, then you can test it and find out what it means, how it behaves. The same with the mind. When the citta is pure, just the mind, no other the five senses, then you can understand what it is and how it works. So those are sorts of things you saw there that you do need to have overcome, or at least not overcome, but at least restrained those five hindrances so they're not in operation for a while. You haven't overcome them yet, but you've subdued them so they're not active. And then you have the opportunity of developing insight into what these things really are. And if anybody did that, then maybe 7 days or 8 days with a mind freed from the five hindrances, you'd be able to look in to what's happening with the body, with feeling, with mind, with these Dhamma objects, and understand them 100%. It can be done. But it's important you are honest about how it is done. So these are the ways where we can understand great insights and how they work. But lastly, one of the stories which I love telling, I've already mentioned to you, you're not really supposed to tell people about whether you can do these things or whether you are enlightened or not. And nevertheless, I really do enjoy telling when I became enlightened. Are you interested? You know, there's a little bit of a trick to the end of this, but many of you heard it before. And anyway, I enjoyed telling it. I was a monk for 4 years. My fourth rains retreat was in the northeast of Thailand in this very simple monastery. Nothing much to do, terrible food, but you kind of got used to it, but not that much. But nevertheless, I was young, healthy, a lot of free time, a lot of nice meditation. And then during the middle of the rains retreat, one evening, you were allowed to sort of meditate as long as you wished. There wasn't any sort of schedule. That's one of the reasons I don't like schedules. If you have it, honestly, it's not because I'm rebellious of schedules and don't want to be disciplined or trained. Sometimes you're meditating, it gets really powerful. And the last thing you want to hear when it's really powerful meditation, ding, and you have to get up and bow and do some chanting. So because of that, it was great in these small monasteries where you can meditate as late as you wanted and get up any time in the morning. If you needed to sleep in, you could, because you were meditating to the wee hours in the morning. So on one of these evenings, you were meditating, and there are times you get really hot, not every time, really peaceful. Meditation gets easier and easier and easier, deeper and deeper. And I mentioned to you about the great walking meditation. And this happened when I was doing the walking meditation, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So nice and peaceful, no one else around. You're walking really slowly. The mind was getting free of all the hindrances. And just as you were walking, these amazing insights started coming into your mind. You don't look for them. You don't search for them. You don't investigate. They come to you. All these insights started pouring in. And it was just amazing. You get so much joy and energy. Every insight was fantastic. But then, of course, the big one came. This amazing insight. And I thought, wow. Another enlightened being has arisen in the world. I really thought I was enlightened. I wasn't an idiot. I really thought so. And then as soon as you were enlightened, there's so much bliss. You went to sit down. Meditating was the easiest thing in the world. You just sat and just was so blissed out. And then I thought, well, we've got to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I should just go to my room and just stretch. I knew I couldn't go to sleep. I just stretched. And then when the body felt relieved pretty quickly, went back to the hall. So I was there meditating when the 3 o'clock bell rang. And when we did our chanting, sometimes when people do chanting, it's like you're half dead, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning. But that morning, when we started the chanting, Yo so Bhagawa, I had so much energy. I couldn't sort of chant softly. And then after the chanting was finished, we cleaned up and went on alms round. And when we went on the alms round, that was amazing. Going on alms round as an enlightened monk. Every time somebody put a lump of sticky rice in your bowl, zap, I zapped them with loving kindness. So you don't realize the amount of merit you're making, giving giving some rice to a newly enlightened monk. Wow, that's huge good karma. They may have put a banana in, just one small banana. You are so lucky. And when I got back from the alms round, just, just big smile, bigger than usual smile, really happy, very peaceful, having shared the benefits of your enlightenment with all these villagers. Then I saw in the dining room, they usually had just one pot of curry to go with the rice which you got from alms round. That morning, there were 2 pots of curry. The usual pot of curry which you had there was what we called the rotten fish curry. The fish were collected the rains retreat before, put in jars and left to go rotten. And that was what we'd always eat, staple food every day. It stank, it tasted terrible, but that's all you had to eat. Rotten fish curry. But today, there was another pot of curry. It was actually like a pork curry. And that was the only time the whole range retreat was sort of different than the usual pot of curry. And I thought, I understand. The heavenly beings have seen there's a new arahat in the world. And they have come to celebrate. I actually thought that. So I sat down. I was the second monk in line for Rains retreat that time. And when the head monk received those 2 pots of curry, we already had our rice already in the bowl. He took 2 whopping ladlefuls of the pork curry. Just we couldn't be vegetarians over there. There was no vegetarian food, honest. 2 whopping ladles. No one could eat that much. But I didn't mind because, that you're an enlightened being, you're just kind to all beings. You don't criticize. But then what he did next really shook me. He took the pot of pork curry. He'd already taken his own, and he poured it all into the rotten fish curry. Stirred it all up. And said, it's all the same. It's all the same. And of course, I thought, if it's all the same, why didn't you mix it up together before you took yours? You hypocrite. Now you've spoiled my celebratory meal. I'm going to have to eat the same old rotten fish curry again. That's unacceptable. I was angry. But worse than anger is realizing enlightened beings don't get angry. That was so disappointing. And from that moment on, I was depressed. It's one of the worst experiences of my monastic life. Thinking you're enlightened and then realizing you're not. And I didn't mind what I ate after that. I just dropped a couple of ladlefuls in, passed it down. It took me a long time to recover from that. So that was the time I thought I was enlightened, and I wasn't. That's what I can tell you about it. It was good fun anyway. And hopefully you enjoyed that. But it was nice having a taste of what it must be like. It's blissed out. So if anyone here comes up and says they're enlightened, you can tell me what food you really don't like. And I'll mix it all up for you and just see what that does. Okay, so that's enough for this morning. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.